Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we'll Masechtas Chulin daf Nun Aleph. We are going to begin on the bottom of Nun Amud Beis, 3 lines on the bottom, regarding the Hemseis Ubeis Hakosos. So these are two of the 4 stomachs of a cow, namely the second and third stomach, which we could see over here in this picture, which we've seen multiple times. And the reason why it's called the base of kosos, as we've mentioned as well numerous times, you can look at this picture to give us a little bit of an idea of these two different parts of the stomach, as is described. In the base of kosos, it looks like there's tiny little cup-like figures, and the hemseis has this barb-like papillae, almost like hairs, as you could see in this picture. Now, once we've seen the basics, let's remind ourselves of the Mishnah all the way back at the beginning of our parak on Mem Beis that said that there's holes in certain of the organs, so then that will make it a treifa. Nikva hamara, for example, if the maw had a hole in it, or the mara, or the gallbladder, or the dakin, the intestines. And then it says hakeres hapenimis, the inner keres, and this is what we delved into a little bit yesterday when it says hakeres hapenimi, that if it has even a small hole, so we weren't exactly sure what exactly is the keres hapenimi, so we're just machmer, and we say the whole thing is the keres hapenimi, as we also saw in that Rashi, yesterday's daf. Fine. And then it says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Hagdolah Teva Katana Baruba, okay, which we said that when it comes to the keres hachitzaina, it's we're machmer, either it's rov or a tefach, whatever one is, even if it's less than a tefach, rov would also be a problem. So we spent a lot of time talking about the keres. Okay, so now we're talking about the hemsis and the base of kaisos. So again, the keres is the first stomach, so it makes sense. We talked about, generally speaking, which is a large stomach, we are machmir for the most part, even the small hole. Now when it comes to these other two, the stomach number 2 and 3, the Mishnah said that the hemseis ubesa koso shenikvo l'chutz. So if there's a hole on the outside of them, so then it will be problematic. Okay, so with that said, let's look at the Gemara. So Tan Rabban. So again, it's totally if there's a hole. So Tan Rabban. Mechet shenimsas ba'oivi besa kaisai. So let's say you find a needle in the base of kosos, in stomach number 3, in stomach number 2. So masad echa gshera. If you only find it going through one side, it's kosher because the other side will hold it all together, basically. So it'll still be okay. Mishnei stadim treifa. However, if it's went straight through, then it's going to be a treifa. Okay, so that's the distinction. So that's point number 1. However, that's not always the case. Nimsala kairit dam. In the event where you would see that on the needle there is a granule of blood, as we continue on Aleph, then biyadua shlifnei shchita. So then it becomes problematic, because if the hole or the needle was there after the shchita, we don't care, right? The problem is if it was there before shchita and the hole went through both sides of the base of kosos, of stomach number 2, then that's where it becomes problematic. So again, if you see that there's blood on the needle, so then you know that it probably took place before the shchita, and therefore it's a treifa. However, lo nimsalek kairet dam, if you didn't find any blood on that, then we'll assume that it took place after the shchita, and there was not a question, not a problem. So let's look at question 9. You have a mechet which was found in the thickness of the base of kosos, of stomach number 2, Mishnei Stadim went through both sides. So the Gemara says it's treifa, but it's not so simple. As we just said, it depends. Only if you're nimsa karet dam. Only if there's blood on that needle. However, if you don't find a karet dam, then it's kshera. So it's an important detail that it's only treifa when you have blood on it. Okay. Now the Gemara continues. Hagoli piyamake. Let's say there's a hole, okay, and covering the hole is a scab due to some type of wound. So biyadua, it's understood sheshlosh yamim kodim shchita. It probably, a scab takes time to develop, so therefore it was probably there already a few days before the shchita, and therefore even though it could be a problem because then the hole was already there. It says Rashi v'im lacha. Let's say you sold it within those 3 days, have a mekachtos, because if the hole was there, the animal's a treifa. Then if you sold it, it could have been under false pretenses. The person would have thought that really you're selling something in which is a kosher animal. Therefore, you have to return the money. Now, that's in the event that there was a scab that developed there 3 days before. Lo higud piyamake. Let's say the scab was not there, so we don't know again when this hole took place. We don't know if it was there before the purchase or afterwards, and therefore it all depends basically where the money is. So if the money's already exchanged, so then you have to prove otherwise to get your money back. So understand, why are we making this distinction here from all other holes? The Afla de Lake Dam Tarif Mar. Why did he mention when it came to blood on the needle? That's the only time when it went through the base of kosos on both sides. Then it'll be treifa. What do you mean? If you find a hole, it's a treifa. What's the difference if the needle has or doesn't have blood? So why is it different when it comes to the base of kosos? So hasam leikamidi lemisrach hacha kivan deika mechet. So in this situation, if there's no needle, so all you see is a hole, so then that's it. So over here, because there is a needle, it's possible that if it was before the shchita, the blood would have gotten stuck to the needle. So basically, that's what it's coming to demonstrate, that if in fact there's blood on it, then that would be a demonstration that it took place before the shechita. However, there's no blood over there, then maybe it just happened, and that was it. Says Rashi, if you find a hole without a needle, kishadam yoitze hu miskanech belachluchas habasar, and let's say the blood is going through the liquid part of the meat, there's nothing to examine. But over here, you have this needle in which to examine. Look at this scholar, Yosim Rava, who comes from Eretz Yisrael. Yomer Ravavira Shmani. He says, my name, Ravavira Shmi is my name. Yomer Masa. He said a story, Rabbi, and he said the following: So we have a big problem over here because it says clearly that when it comes to the basic kaisais, even if it just went through one side, it's a treifa. We said it's only when it goes through both sides and it has blood on the needle. So he sent him lo asal gabe. He did not go in front of me. So Ozil hula gabe havika igra, and he was on the top floor on a roof. Armor nichos mar benesi lo nochas. Fine. Solik hula gabe. So he went to the top of the roof. What exactly? Tell me what happened over here. So Ormulay mafter kinsiais on le'elam Rabbi Rabba. So there's Rashi over here to help me out over here. So he said that I departed to go from Rabbi Rabba. Vahavi Rav Huna Sipoira, and Rav Huna Sipoira, which is a place. I'm trying to find a Rashi over here. Okay. Okay. Rav Asi Mada Yoshin Lafanam, and he was sitting in front of, he was sitting there. Ubasli Rebbe, and this is what happened. This is what happened. They said the case of Mechad Shnimsis Ba'oivi Basic Kaisis Masad Echad. There was a hole on one side of the basic Kaisis. V'havcha, they flipped it over. V'havcha Rebbe flipped it over. Matzala had carried down the tarfa. He found that there was a drop of blood on the needle, and he said it was a treifa. So we see clearly that it only requires the penetration of the basic into the basic kosas by one side, not by both. V'yomer im ein shamake karid daminayin. Understand, if there was no hit, then how is there blood? So Amalei tarich taryelahu gavra. Look at Rashi. Kama hatarach deloisa ish. Look how much difficulty this person went through. Al atzma hayomer. He's saying this upon himself. Shetrichu zeh lavo etzlo, that he troubled himself to come to you. Lishnachrina tarach tiria kamoyi the tiria kloimer bechinam tarachti lavoy she'in kan davar chadash. I came here for nothing. Masnisahi hemses bezakaisa shenikvul chutz. So when it comes to the hole on the outside, it has to have on both sides. So basically, he's saying it's not true that one side has to go through both sides for it to not be good. Okay, so that's the end of that. Let's just make sure there's no other questions popping up from here. Keres, we did the Keres. Okay. Let's see, Nuntes, Aniach Behemo Mala. Okay, I didn't do that one yet. Okay. Alright, so let's now see the next piece, which has to do with Risuk Varim. So, Naflim and Agag. So let's go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah said that another possibility of an animal becoming a treifa is if the animal fell off of a roof, and there was some severe damage that took place there. So in that situation, the Mishnah says that it's a treifa, right? And it's possibly that it became a treifa. Now Rashi over there on the Mishnah says that what did you do? It fell off the roof and you shechted it immediately. It's a treifa. Avol bi she'in shever nirabo, even though there's no broken limbs. Chosheshin nisrasku nisparku ivireha shalach mosh mesinai. So there's a halach mosh mesinai that we're concerned of risik ivarim, that there was a dislodgement of the organs. They got all dismantled and shook up inside, so they're not functioning properly. So even though they're all there and we don't see any broken bones, but that's an issue of Nafal and Agag. Okay, we're going to understand again what the dinim are when we get to Amud Beis. Amar Huna, Haniach behemo mala. Let's say you had an animal on the top of a roof, uva v'matzalamata, and all of a sudden you see it on the ground. So we're not concerned that the limbs got dislodged. We're not concerned that that's going to be the case, which normally requires us to wait, as Rashi says, me'es la'es, by any nefula. We don't, because we want to wait to see if it's actually going to, if it's just a healthy thing and it landed fine. We don't require you to do that. It's because you saw it on the ground. You don't have to worry and assume that there's a problem. Okay. So that's an important detail. Hahu Gadya, there was this kid goat, the Havile Ravina, he owned it, and it was on a roof, and there happened to also be, as Rashi says, a skylight over there. The Havile Ravina, the Chaza Chulsha di Puma. So it saw that this Rashi says Soidim, he saw barley, which was all peeled, and apparently it was opposite the, Rashi says, the Pi Haruba. It was opposite the skylight, and it was obviously interested in eating. So Dagar, Rashi says Kafat, it jumped, Nafal mi'ikril ara. It went from the roof to the ground. Now, I thought we just said before there's no issue of risuki varim, so maybe that's what we're going to see. So also coming to Ravash, we said you don't have to worry about risuki varim when you find an animal that went from the top to the bottom. Mishum de isla mide misrach. That's in a situation because there's something to hold on to. Let's say there's walls that it can climb down. So therefore, we don't assume that it just jumped 50 floors, but we assume that it climbed down, and therefore we don't have to worry about it. However, Bahai Leisli Midi Misrach. In this situation, because we're talking, says Rashi, Shlo Kafsa Derech Aruba El Betsidi Hagag, it went through the side of the roof. Basically, there's a good chance it may have actually injured itself. Oh, Dilma Mishum Amda Nafsha. Maybe the reason why we normally don't have to worry about it is because an animal is able to assess the situation. It's able to figure out, can I jump 5 feet? Can I jump 30 feet? It knows instinctively how far it can jump. So behind Nami Amda Nafsha, the fact that you see it down here, maybe there's no reason to be concerned, right? Because if it was up in Empire State Building, the animal knows not to jump instinctively, but it just knows itself how much it's able to do it. That's just so therefore maybe you don't have to worry about it. So is it the reason why that you find an animal on the bottom of the ground that you don't have to worry about Risa Kivarim is because we assume it climbed down, but here there was no way it could have climbed down, or we don't see any walls, it just jumped, there's nothing there, or alternatively it's because it's oimid, and therefore that's something which we assume the animal always figured out. Therefore, because it could assess its jump, and therefore that's not something we have to be concerned about. Okay, let's look at TA 19 right away. That's easy. So just the nafsha, it just knows, right? It assesses the situation. And here it's the same thing. TB22, I wrote Habehema Omdala Nafsha. I wrote V'gam hu noisin hatsi pornayim, his nails, to ease the fall. Okay, but that's not what we're saying on Maskana. That's not, I put that in parentheses. I'm glad I did, because that's not what they're looking for. Okay, they just want the Maskana, and that's it. That's TB22. Okay. All right, let's keep on moving. So that's a nice story over there, and it all worked out fine. The animal's good. He Imrasa. Okay, so now we're going to be talking about this other animal. The Havi Be Rav Chaviva. The Havi Shadran Karye Basraisa. Its feet were dragging. It says Rashi, Ragleha Achrainim, its hind legs were dragging. It says Nigrorim Achareha. Some Rabbi Yemer, so hi Shigruna Naktya. So perhaps it's because this animal has some type of cramps. So not necessarily does it determine, it must be has a Risuki Varim. So Maska Ravina Vidilma Chota Shedra Ifsik, maybe the spinal cord snapped. Maybe the reason why it can't walk is because it's significantly injured. So Bud Kua, Ashke Ravina, they actually examined it and found out, as Ravina said, that there was something wrong with the Chota Shedra, and therefore perhaps it should now be a problem. V'il Hachi Hilchas Kamar Yemar, which is kind of hard to understand, that the halacha is like Rav Yemar, who basically said, no, it's just cramps, even though they examined it and they saw it wasn't cramps. So Shagruna Shchiach Chota Shedra Lo Shchiach. The reason why is that the fact that it was injured by its actual spinal column, that is something in which is not very common, and therefore we're just going to assume that Taka was cramps. Even though it's true there could have been something also wrong with its spinal column, but generally speaking we don't have to worry about it. Instead we're just going to look at the situation and assume that it's not a treifa. Rav Huna's charim, when it comes to male rams, they smash their heads and their horns into each other, their curved horns, they're banging and banging into each other. Even though it seems like they're, I mean, if they would do that to me, I'd probably have to get Hatzalah, right? But these rams, that's what they did. They would bang into each other, and Gemara elsewhere says that they have some like worms or something in their head, and it's a way to kind of like heal them of that. Commonly it's a way to show dominance, especially when it comes to mating season. So the one which is able to smash the other one harder, the other one goes away. So Afagav Davu Vikaimi Simrab Almahu the Nakaluhu. Even though there definitely is anguish and pain of smashing into each other, it's just a heat, as Rashi says, chamimus, and therefore it's not Risa Kivarim. Okay. However, of course, Inaful Ara Vadi Chashina. If we actually afterwards see one of the rams fall into the ground, then that is an issue. But typically, that's just normal occurrences for rams hitting each other. Umrav Menashi, or Menashe, it says on the side, Hani Dichri, again referring to these rams, the Ganvi Ganvi, Ein Chashim Risa Kivarim. If you have these thieves, as Rashi says, what do? They lift up these animals over the wall, and then they plop on the other side. So you would think when these thieves are throwing the animals from one side to the next, that could have caused damage to the animals. No, we're not concerned. My timer, because when they throw them, they make sure Amasainu Shadulu, that they land on their loins, and therefore, because it's not going to land on their backs or anything like that, so it's not going to be a problem. Okay, obviously because they don't want them to get ruined. Kehechi Dilrahati Kamaihu, so this way they'll be able to continue to move and to run afterwards. However, Ahad Rinhu, let's say the animals are being thrown back to their original place, Vadi Chashina, because he doesn't care, he just wants to get rid of it, but it depends. If he throws the ram over the fence because he's afraid, maybe he's going to get caught or something, so he doesn't really care about what happens to the other animal, he just doesn't want anyone seeing him with a stolen item. You know he's going to want to do a proper tshuva. So the fact that he's returning it in order to do tshuva, so therefore you know that he's going to make sure that the animal isn't going to get injured. So therefore there will not be an issue of Risa Kivarim. It's very interesting. Maybe Yehuda Marav, Hika al Roisha, if it gets hit on its head, the Holchala Klapi Znava, and then it goes opposite the tail, al Znava, it gets hit on the tail, the Holchala Klapi Roisha, Keneged Kol Shedra Kula, or even it gets hit Keneged the entire Shedra, in Chashim Shemar Yavarim. However, Yishom Chutra, if let's say the stick is very long, if Lugi de Gabach Haishinan, then we are concerned. So the whole issue, and the reason why we're not so concerned, is that we don't assume that the stick is going to have hit the spinal column or the ribs, and therefore it's not an issue. But if it's a larger stick, then we are concerned. And not only that, the Isma Kitri, if there are knots throughout the stick, knots, Chashina, we're afraid that it could possibly have damaged. V'i Machia Afsaki Chashina, and if it's on the width of the back, says Rashi, behefsik kaloimer loroiche hagav, on the width of its back, chashin l'chut shedra. If you're going to hit it on the back, the width of its back, then we're afraid you may have damaged the spinal column. Amar Rav Nachman, Beis HaRechem, regarding the womb, ein bo mishum risuki yavarim. We're not concerned that when an animal is born and sometimes it like lands on the ground, there's no issue of Risa Kevarim. The animal is going to be fine. I'll prove to you that there's no reason to be concerned, and therefore, as Rashi says, you don't have to even wait me'es l'es, to be able to determine that it's okay. Tinuk ben yoim echad. If you have a 1 day old, as we continue nun aleph omid beis, matama beziva. We say it's matama if, let's say, some ziva comes out of even a tinuk ben yoim echad, then we say there's a din ziva on that. Now, if we're afraid that maybe it's like a treifa, to ikri kan mivsar v'lo machmas einsai, says Rashi, hari chayilhu. Then if we're concerned of risak ivarim, then it shouldn't be a zav, because it'll fall into the category of someone who's sick. Says Rashi, ze'echem eshiva derachim shazav nivach behen. As at the beginning of Kedushin elsewhere, there's 7 ways that we're baidik the zav, that if he falls out of these 7 ways, in matama ba'inus. Dechsiv zav mivsar shei b'sar kamushahu shalom v'lo ba'inus. So if it's something which is just an inus, then he's not going to be a zav. So if it's a raya, therefore, that there's no din of risak ivarim, because otherwise it wouldn't be shak to be a zav. Of course, since that's not necessarily a raya, hakamayaskinin can gun shiatza derech daifen. Says Rashi, alidei tzam, some type of medication, ubein imoy chayin, ve'ein loimer shli achar shemei se'imo hotziyuhu. Okay, all right. Toshma, egel shenoyeled be yomtiv. So let's say you have an egel that's born on Yom Tiv. Says Rashi, Ein kan mishum mukse, even though it was born on Yom Tiv, so you think maybe it's noylad, literally is born on Yom Tiv. No, it's not a problem. Says Rashi, Shari muchen hoya agav imoy, because before it was born, you could have shechted the mother, right? Shech noisu bo b'yoyim alma mishum risuki yivarim nami leispe. Obviously, the fact that you could shecht it, and therefore there's not an issue, the animal, you could eat it then, so we're also not concerned of risak ivarim, right? Therefore, the fact that you could eat it. Ego shano b'yamtiv sheichna so b'yamtiv. So achanam kigan shiyata derech daifen. So it doesn't necessarily mean a proof that there's no issue of risak ivarim in the natural birth. Tashma v'shavin shim noilad who. Everyone agrees is brought down Masechtas Be'el. It's also with this Rashi, Gabi Bechor, regarding a firstborn animal, Shenod Boy Mum, that developed a blemish on Yom Tiv. Shavin, everyone agrees over there. They feel ha'oiser b'noyelid bo b'yoyim mum mishum muksa ha'ya ben hashmashas machmas isver kachim b'chutz. That when they agree that even when noyelid there was a mum on that day, so you would say it's considered to be muksa machmas iser. Aval im noyelid hayoyim umumu imoy. But let's say the mum was born and the mum was with it. Muchanhu shulun neser ma'oylam. Daha b'mei imo hayamuchan agav imo. Umuter the bechor enu kadosh ad sheyoyelid and sheyevoyelid. So we say with the bechor that's born is only considered to be sanctified once it's born, because shenoylad harimumo imoy v'roy l'shachet b'chutz. You could have shechted it outside. So therefore, if an animal has developed a mum at birth or before birth, so then everyone holds it's not going to be an issue, as is brought down over there in Masechtas Be'ah. So go back in the Gemara. Shim noyod hu umumu imoy. Let's say the young was born with its mum shizem and muchan. So then we say it's muchan, and therefore you could eat it. Everyone holds that when it comes to a yotzid daifen, that's not kaidish, says Rashi. It's brought them as this nida, which we'll get to eventually. Hari hun kiyoloi. Yoshevas alavi made tumah v'tahira. Hasam hu disrabi mivim nekeva teled. Rabbi yotzid daifen. Aval inin kadshim maidashenu kadosh. Nechsev kiyavalid probably yotzid daifen. We say that when it comes to for the animal to be kadosh, a bechor cannot be yotzid daifen. So you can't give that answer. So maybe again this is taka proof that it's not an issue of Risuke Varim. So Hagamaskinan Shehifris al Gabi Karka. So maybe when do we say it's mutter today? There's no issue of Risuke Varim. Let's say it's Shehifris al Gabi Karka. Says Rashi, Ninar Lamoid B'Tachav Pri Sasav, that it stuck its hooves Lamoid to stand. Darmina Kaman Gabi Nafula, regarding an animal that fell. Amda, once the animal stands up on its own from its falling, in its Mesel Ace. So maybe we're just talking about that we see that the animal stood up. So because it stood up, that's why there's no issue of Risuke Varim. But maybe not always. Remember Rav Nachman, Beis Hamit B'Chaim, a animal in a slaughterhouse, Einbo Mishum Risuke Varim. So again, says Rashi, Kishim Mafilin Oisol Aretz. When it falls onto the ground, to shecht it, even if, let's say, it's at a high place, we're not concerned of Risuke Varim. Kahu Torah, there was this ox, the nafel, that fell down in a butchery. Vishtama Kyle Nigichai Seha. And you could hear its gorings or noise. So Al Rav Yitzchak Bar Shmuel Bar Marsha Shakel Mishipuri Shufri. He took from the best part of that meat. So you would think, what do you mean? The fact that you heard it crying and making this noise maybe demonstrates that it really is Risuke Varim. So no, that's not what we're concerned of. We're not concerned of that. Normally, the fact they made noise doesn't mean that anything bad, severely bad happened to it, that it was a treifa. Normally, Rabbanas Manolacha, how do you know? So Malay Hachi and Marav, as we said before, Sipoinim Noyitz Ad Shemigil Aretz, because when in the Beit B'Chaim, when it's about to be shechted, it sticks its nails all the way until it reaches the ground. So again, it's able to cushion the blow, if you will, so it's not going to be something that we have to really concern ourselves with. Okay. All right, let's keep moving. So this is the key line over here, which we're going to see in question 10 in a second. Amr Rav Yehuda, Amr Rav. Amda, if the animal stood up, so again, it fell down, and is an issue of Risuke Varim or not, if the animal stands up on its own in a Sricha Meis Leis, you don't need to wait at all, because we could assume the fact that it stood up on its own, that you don't need to worry about it, because it's totally fine. However, Bedika Vadi Boy, you still need to do a Bedika, you still have to check things out. It says Rashi, B'chot HaShedra, B'shvir Sroed Solois, Uvikiris Choyulia. So you have to look at some of the things like the spinal column. You have to look at to make sure the ribs aren't smashed, right? So you still need to do a bedika, but you don't have to wait. Meis Leis, and as long as everything is intact, you're fine. You don't have to wait. However, Halcha, let's say it starts walking, didn't just stand up, it starts walking around in a Sricha B'dika. You don't have to do anything, because an animal which have had such breakages of its spinal column and the like would not be able to walk around. No, it doesn't make any difference. Even if it's walking around, we still want you to do a bedika. And that may be all we need for question 10. If you have an animal that fell, that stood up, or it's walking, do you need to wait Meisel Ace? Do you need bedika sevarm? So when it comes to it standing up, you definitely don't need Me'esel Ace. Halcha, if it's walking around, you definitely don't need Me'esel Ace. That's no question. The question is, if it's walking, if it's just standing up, then you need Bedika Sevarim. The machlokus is, if the animal starts walking, definitely you don't have to wait Me'esel Ace, but there's a machlokus if you need Bedika Sevarim, if you actually still have to examine the limbs. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Acha Omarav Pashta Yada Lamoid. Let's say it stretches out one of its hands with intention to move. Avamishul Omdim didn't do it. Akra Ragla or Akra Ragla Lahalich. It had the intention to move its foot. Avamishul Halcha, even though it didn't actually do it. In other words, it doesn't actually have to do it, just has like the intention to want to do it. That would be sufficient to not require Meisel Ace, and maybe even enough to say you don't even need a Bedika. Chistaimer Ne'ira, if it's preparing to get up, Even if it didn't actually stand up. The law is, let's just see this parentheses. If it fell off of a roof. But the that stands up, but did not move, then sricha bedika, vein sricha mesel ace. Now everyone holds that. If a bedika namulot sricha, and that's actually its machlokas. Okay. Amar meimer mishmei the Rav Dimim and Ardan, the foolish Amru, when we're talking about this animal that fell down, sricha bedika keneged b'nei moyim. We want you to also examine the b'nei moyim. Says Rashi, shemel likra roiv hachitzaina. Maybe the majority of the outer part got ripped up, and maybe there's a hole in the dakin and the intestines. So we want you to check this stuff out. Armale Marzutra Hachi Amina Mishamid Papa Sricha Bedika Keneged Beis Hachalal Kulai. We want you to check the whole inner cavity, as the ribs also may have broken, as Rashi says. Okay. Amrule Huna Mar Bar Bere the Rav Nachman Nehemia Ravashi Simanim Mai. What is that? Says Rashi. When it comes to these simanim, namely the windpipe, the air pipe, mi boy bedika shemin akru, or do we actually have to examine those as well? Like we examine the lungs, do we have to be baidik these simanim? So Amalei simanim kashin hein eitzel nafil. When it comes to an animal that fell, the simanim are relatively hard regarding it falling, which basically means it's not something you have to really be concerned about. Amar Yehuda Amar Shmuel oif, when it comes to a bird, nechbat al pnei hamayim. Let's say it banged it fell against its will, and it landed onto the water, and we're concerned of risek ivarim of the bird. So kivan sheshat moli kamasai daya. Once it starts able to swim, even it's just its body length, that's enough, and you don't need to even do a bedika. Vo amran, the only time we say this din is elu mamata lamala, that if it's going upstream, in other words, the bird is swimming against the current. So if it's going against the current, that shows it's fine. Aval mamala lamata mayahu di ash pilu. The fact that it's going with the current, that doesn't prove anything, and therefore there could still be an issue, and we need to do a bedika. However, the maya kaima, if the water is still, it's not flowing either direction, leislan ba, it's not an issue, because obviously it's not going with a current. There is no current. V'shadish sivi v'kadmei ha kadmei. If let's say there's twigs of wood in the ground, in the water, and you could see that it's going ahead of the wood, these twigs, so then it obviously shows that it's even though it may be going with current, but the fact that it's going faster than these light pieces of twigs in the water, that demonstrates that it's doing it on its own, on the bird's accord, and therefore that demonstrates that there's probably nothing wrong with the bird, and it's fine. Okay. Isla umikrave kitri chayshinan. If let's say you have knots near each other, like on a net, so then we are concerned. So let's look in Rashi. So says Rashi, when it comes to Isla, oif, you have a bird, shenafel bereshus. You have a bird that fell into some type of a net, and it's near the knots. So in that situation, it's possible the knots may have, when it smashed into those knots, they could have been strong and hard, and it could cause damage. However, even though they're in a net, this bird's in a net, we're not concerned if it wasn't near a bunch of knots. Kisna, the Ovid Betuni, let's say you have this linen which was made into bundles, as Rashi Pishtan Hasui Chavilois, you have these linen which is made into bundles, Hashinan, the high gisa Chashina. So if it landed a bird into these bundles, because it's very thick and heavy, it could have done damage. But if it fell on the side, on that side, so then we're not as concerned. Okay, Asuriasa says Rashi, Chavil shel kanim, bundles of reeds, also chashin because they're hard. Kisna dedayek, let's say you have this linen that was beaten, but nafetz and combed, loy chashin because it's softened up. Daik vol nafetz chashinan. If it's, even though it's beaten, even though it's not combed, that is the problem. It has to be beaten and combed for it to have been softened up. Otherwise, it could have caused damage to the bird. The Ovid Bizri, let's say, says Rashi, a field daik v'nofetz. Even let's say it was beaten and combed, but it's in bundles. We're concerned that there's going to be knots. And kivan di ikabok kitri, again, since there's knots in there, chayshinan. Dekata chayshinan, says Rashi, no erga shivrei givulin. If you have the leftover stalks, then we're concerned. They're heavy. De kad kita loy chashina. However, says Rashi, dakam and a daka, if they're soft stalks, then we're not concerned because even though the bird landed on them, it's not going to cause problems. Nivra chayshinan, says Rashi, tsiv hagadol tsaviv hadikolim. You have this bass that grows near the palm trees, and they dry up, and they're like made into straps. So again, that could cause some damage. Tim chasa loy chayshinan. However, after it's already been broken up into the straps, and they're a little bit softer, so we're not concerned. Kitma nihila, when it comes to sifted ashes, which happens to be a little bit hard, chayshinan. However, lo nihila loy chayshinan. However, if they were not completely sifted, then we're not concerned because they are not hard. So if they lands on them, we're less concerned about that. Okay. Nun beis amud aleph, choyol hadak. You have this sand, which is pretty soft. Loy chayshinan. Chol hagas, if it's coarse, chayshinan, because it could have done damage. Rashi says choyol hagas are avanim gedoyel shaboy, because there's also stones inside them, like pebbles. Avak derachim, avak derachim chashinan. When it comes to the dirt that's on the ground, on the roads, that certainly is packed and could have caused a lot of damage on these animals. Tivna. Let's say we're talking about straw, tevin shalchitim v'sarim, the straw that comes from wheat and barley, the ovid b'zaga, but it's made into piles. Says Rashi chavila, chashin lo ovid b'zaga chashin, but it wasn't made into a pile, so it's just like a almost like jumping on a haystack. It's not a problem. Chiti v'chol diminaihu. When it comes to wheat and all of its species, chashinan. If they fell on them, we're concerned. Sa'ari, when it comes to barley, v'chol diminayu, anything like barley, and some people have this gears on the side, loy chayshinan. Okay, apparently it's not as hard. Kol mini kitnios, all forms of legumes, they're not hard. Lavar min ruvia. When it comes to fenugreek, that is something which is a bit hard. Tiltan, Rashi says, that's something to worry about. Chimtzi. Says Rashi, mechalikin hein ve'enum nichbashim. So these are, some people translate peas. Chivtzi, which are another type of peas, where they're translated usually as chickpeas. They're harder. Klal de milsa. Okay, finally, we're going to get to the bottom line over here. What is the general rule? Kol midi demishrik, anything which is slippery, says Rashi, Macham Zelazet, can easily slip from one to the other, because they're not packed to one another to make it hard. However, if they're not slippery, then it could be an issue of risik, you land on it, could do damage. Dovuk, Ravashi Shari Amimar Aser. So says Rashi, Gludia, v'tachenoiso b'daf katan. You put it on this paper, v'oiv shaykhin alav, and a bird will land on it. Umidbak boy, and get stuck to it. Upareach im hadaf v'noifel aretz, and he will fly with the board and eventually fall on the ground. So basically, it's glue on a small board and ends up like getting stuck to the bird, and then the bird falls down while it's stuck onto this piece of wood. So it's a machlokus whether that's Risa Givarim. Ravashi Sharamei Mirasu. So B'chad Gafa, if let's say it's only stuck to one wing, to come you'll play the Shari, because that probably it was able to fly hard but with one wing. So therefore, even though it fell down, it kind of cushioned its blow and it didn't do major damage. Ki pligi betray gafi. If it got stuck with two of its wings, manda aser melach hechineko. They'll say like, how could you possibly say it was able to get up? It's obviously it fell down and it had no ability to fly even when it went down, so it smashed onto this board and it caused damage. It's possible it could have managed through the sides of the or the edges of the wings. Some say betray gapi by it was stuck to two wings, plagi de aser, because it's definitely a problem. Ki plagi b'chad gafa was only stuck to one wing. Madishar melach efsher de parech b'chad gafa. One says it could fly with one wing. Madi aser kivan de b'hai lo matzi pareach b'hai nami lo matzi pareach. If a bird has one wing which is not able to fly because it's stuck to this board, the other wing won't do much either. The hilchasa betray gafi aser b'chad gafa shari, and this is actually the halacha that if it gets stuck to a board with glue, so it's only an issue if it's stuck by both wings, but one it will be okay. Okay, we're going to stop there. Maybe there's another question. We went really deep into the Amud. Of hanilcha b'dibuk, right? So this glue, it got stuck with this glue on a board. So as we said, if it got stuck with one wing, it's still mutter. Two wings, it will be aser. Maybe another question. Maybe. Let's see. Question TA19 we did. TB23, we'll see tomorrow. Adkan.